Phoenix, Arizona is known for a couple of reasons across the United States. If you don't know your geography, you think of the Grand Canyon the second you see the name Arizona. If you know your geography a bit better but are more partly inclined, you think of the nation's largest university, Arizona State University. And if you're in law enforcement, you think of identity theft. While the city suffers from the usual spat of stolen credit card numbers, it also isn't very far from the border, and that comes with its own set of problems when you factor in all the undocumented immigrants. Which is what I expected this most recent phone call from my buddy in the OIG to be about. "Hopefully I'm not calling too late," Richard said as soon as I put the phone up to my ear. "Rick, you're in Los Angeles. It's the same time there that it is here." I pulled the phone from my ear to check the time, which read 10:30 p.m. "So yes, it's late. Unless you were calling to catch up with an old buddy." He didn't respond. I groaned. "It's work, isn't it?" "Unfortunately, yes. OIG is willing to pay your usual stipend if you're up for it." I looked over at the small IKEA desk in my studio apartment that held my two most recent pieces of mail. A coupon flyer for the local Fry's grocery store and a final notice for an overdue credit card. "What's the job?" I heard Richard sigh in relief. "You're saving my ass here, Ace. All of our CIs in Phoenix are busy on a huge project and my boss wants this done as quietly as possible. I already said yes, Rick. You don't have to go into the spiel. Just tell me what I'm looking for." He didn't respond immediately, but I was almost sure that I heard the word asshole before he did. "Our office received a rash of reports last year of 18-year-olds applying for their social security numbers for the first time. I know you haven't been out here for a while, but that's not impossible considering all the small towns in the middle of the desert. Some of them can have that sovereign citizen thinking. Does the name Freedom mean anything to you?" I thought for a second. "There's some town with that name up north, near the Utah border, I think. That's Fredonia. Freedom is located about 20 miles north of Phoenix according to the statement by Nia Jefferson." I knew the Valley of the Sun pretty well at that point in my life, and that description didn't make any sense. "Well, Nia Jefferson is talking some BS because the only place that could be where she described is Anthem." "Exactly. Thing is, she sent in these requests herself a number of years ago. Claimed that the city she grew up in disappeared somehow and was looking for answers about it from whoever would listen to her ramble. Eventually, she got tired of sending us emails and we just kept on ignoring her. Probably the right move. She sounds like a crazy person." "That's what we thought too. She did apply for a new social security number, birth certificates and such. None of her prints or blood work came back with any matches in any law enforcement or healthcare system. So the state decided to avoid a legal headache after she threatened a lawsuit and just gave her what she wanted. And they haven't heard from her since." I was out of bed by this point, and I tried to open up my laptop and search for any mention of a town named Freedom. "Well, Nia doesn't seem to be a problem for you guys. Why call me?" "You're right in that Nia isn't the problem. However, we think that she's a symptom of the problem." After a fruitless search for Freedom, I began searching for any sign of Nia Jefferson. "A symptom of what? These 18-year-olds applying for social security numbers?" "Nia got hers about 6 years ago." My initial searches showed a young black woman with an active social life, according to her Facebook. Didn't seem like the usual sovereign citizen type. Richard continued. "However, we got a number of concerning reports last year about the same type of thing. 18-year-olds coming in from seemingly nowhere and applying for social security numbers. In the sworn testimonies of all the ones who bothered to fill one out, they describe coming from towns that don't exist and not having any paperwork. No birth certificates and no driver's license." One of the things I did notice that was strange on Nia's social media was the lack of any family connection to her. No parents, no cousins, no distant aunt who lived in another state. And no DNA matches anywhere in the state. Yes. Okay, how many of these kids am I looking for? I said as I clicked around Nia's profile. Other than the lack of family, there was something off that I couldn't quite place. You're not. What the OIG needs from you is to get any information that their lawyer has about them, and try and check out a couple of their claims closer. I stopped clicking the mouse button in slight shock. All of these kids had the same lawyer? Yep. Thomas Silvestri. He's out of Tempe. I typed and I clicked enough to pull up his office's website. Greasy hair and a cheap suit? That's the one. The guy looked familiar, so I clicked back to Nia's Facebook page. There were multiple photos of the lawyer, greasy hair intact, in them with her. Nia's case 7 years ago and all the ones from last year. From what we can tell. However, we've gotten more reports of similar cases coming in since February. With the fact that they've received benefits, it's fallen under us to find if there's anything going on. How many are we talking about? I heard a quiet shuffling of papers coming from Richard's side of the phone before he answered. Nia's report was the first we had records of. From a year ago, we have another 3. So 4? Since February, we've gotten an additional 5. Or at least we think. You think? After some preliminary work filed with Silvestri, we can't find any evidence of them. And you want me to, what, find evidence of fraud or deception with Silvestri? Or do you want me to find these 5 missing maybes? I want you to find out what the hell is going on in Phoenix, Arizona. Silvestri's law office was surrounded by a bail bondsman, a pawn shop, and a long closed-down Circuit City, and a Circle K within walking distance across the nearly empty parking lot. In the far corner was also a liquor store that I was sure to visit on my way out of the dilapidated parking lot. The afternoon heat was dispelled quickly by a gush of fresh air conditioning as I opened the front door. As I closed it, I caught the ending of an open door chime common to most small businesses to let whoever cares know that they had a precious customer. This particular chime was answered by a young woman at a small desk. Hello there, how can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Silvestri on behalf of the OIG. She looked at me blankly. I sighed. I guess it's true you can't find good help these days. Could you let him know that Sam Rockwell is here? Her eyes went wide at the name. Not that Sam Rock. A head popped from the end of the short hallway towards the front. Alejandra? Oh. The greasy hair and cheap suit came into focus as he stepped towards us. Mr. Rockwell. I looked at the hand he held out in polite greeting without taking it. Sam's fine. I'm here on behalf of the OIG, and I was hoping you could answer some questions for me. As Silvestri pulled his hand back, I could see the annoyance on his face at the slight impropriety. Always glad to help out the Inspector General. I followed him to his office, and I sat in the cheap office chair across from his desk. His office was sparse and cheap, much like his suit, without the law books lining every wall that most TV shows depict. His only held a cluttered desk and a double-wide metal filing cabinet. I pulled out my audio recorder and I looked at him. Mind if I record our conversation? Oh, of course not. I placed the recorder on the desk, pressed the record button, and said, I won't waste your time here, Silvestri. I'm looking into any information you have on the kids you've been helping out. He didn't flinch. He had a better poker face than I gave him credit for. I help out a lot of kids. You're going to have to be more specific. I sighed. I pulled out my notebook and I went to the list of names that Richard had given me. Phil Tomlinson, formerly of Wamat, Arizona. Nia Before I could finish the sentence, however, he reached out and turned the recorder off. That could be considered interference, I said after he did, but was interrupted. Silvestri raised his finger. I'm happy to comply, but this is not a good idea, Mr. You said you were hired by the OIG, he asked. I could feel the hidden recorder in my front pants pocket, making sure to sit close enough to pick up our conversation. They think you're committing Social Security fraud and sent me to see if you're on the up and up. That makes sense. He turned around in his chair and pulled open a drawer from the metal filing cabinet behind him. I have the records for them somewhere. I let him search for a little bit while I decided I was going to reveal the second reason I was there. I decided to leave that in my back pocket for now and hopefully surprise him with it later. Oh, here we are, he said, and he pulled out 4 manila folders. All the paperwork I filed with the state and the Social Security Administration. I picked up the first one and I opened it. The first ones I looked at were the legal papers to request a birth certificate for somebody named Tina O'Brien. Any chance I can get copies of all of these? I asked. I'm sure the OIG has copies, so you should be able to get them from them. I sighed. I would be more comfortable if you could make copies for me. I don't like talking to any federal agency unless they're paying me to do so. Why isn't it a good idea to look into this? He gave me a blank stare. Mr. Silvestri. He continued to stare. Please turn off the other voice recorder you have now. If I could see my face, I was sure that it would be ghost pale. I'm not an idiot, Mr. Rockwell. I do my research when I don't know who I'm talking to, and your tricks aren't original. I reached into my pocket and I put the secret recorder on the table. Silvestri picked it up and took the batteries out of it before continuing. I can't stop you from doing this, but I implore you to please stop this investigation. Obviously, the OIG has no idea what it had stumbled into. And just what in the hell did they stumble into so I can't get my damn money from them? Silvestri sighed. They told you about the 7 kids from this year, right? I laughed. Of course they didn't have the right number. He continued like he hadn't been interrupted. These kids came in like the ones from last year. No ID, nothing. I'm just trying to help somebody who needs help. The kids from last year being Phil, Tina, and Mason. I said, reading out from my notebook. Yeah, I was doing the same thing that I did for them. Filing for social security numbers, birth certificates, the usual. Except they never showed up for their court dates. I looked at him in surprise. You don't know where they are? No. After I couldn't get a hold of them, I tried filing a missing persons report. I noticed the word he used when describing what he did. Tried. I have a couple of friends in the police department, and I tried to push the records through them so something actually got done. Again, I heard the word try. He sighed. After they put out an APB, their search was called off less than 24 hours after. By the FBI. Perplexed, confused, and without any immediate things to do after my conversation with Silvestri, I headed over to the liquor store in the mini-mall. This was when Rick decided that I needed a checkup to see how I was doing and called me as my hand was about to push the front door to the store open. He always had the best timing. Hey Rick, I still got some information and leads to follow up on. Nothing concrete. You need to stop the investigation, Sam. The words surprised me. Even after the 3-letter name drop that Silvestri had said, the turn of events still surprised me. Rick? I heard him sigh in frustration. A weird feeling to not have that frustration directed towards me for once. It almost made me feel like his friend again. Our office just got an injunction from the FBI. What happened? I pulled my hand from the door and I stepped onto the sidewalk. I haven't had the time to do anything. I just got out of my meeting with Silvestri and did you say FBI? Yes. He paused for a second on the phone before continuing. What did you do this time, Sam? There was the tone of condescension that I was used to. Like I said, I just had my meeting with Silvestri. Do you think that they're bugging his office? Are you drunk, Sam? No, I said as I looked at the sign declaring Tullamore Dew to be true Irish whiskey. He paused for a second as if he was trying to smell my breath through the cell phone. The injunction came in last night and our office was informed of it this morning. They would have had no idea about us hiring you or anything you were doing before they sent it. But they somehow knew that we were looking into it, which is disturbing that they were watching us this closely. I thought for a second. Didn't you guys work with him on the Alvarez case? Alvarez was a real piece of work. A coyote who specialized in helping disabled immigrants get on disability pay. A kind gesture to be sure, until Richard found out that he was keeping all of the disability checks for himself. One of the poor souls, even under the threat of deportation for fraud, decided to inform the authorities. Even with whiskey breath, I was able to track him down and convince him to testify. One of the few times I felt proud of myself in the last couple of years. We work with the FBI all the time. We are a federal agency, which is why you need to stop this investigation. Rick answered. Wait a minute, I thought you said that they didn't know about me. I said they didn't know about your meeting with Silvestri. They still think that you haven't done anything yet. That was good at least. You gotta listen, Rick. This is weird shit. A bunch of your missing kids are actually missing. Sev. He interrupted me. Sam, you need to stop. The office will pay your stipend for yesterday and today, but you need to stop now. I thought for a second. While there was the usual condescending tone in his voice that I was used to, there was also something else there. Something that I wasn't used to from the straight-laced federal employee. Worry. Fine, I'll just forget about 7 missing kids. And the fact that they all came from places that don't exist. And the fact that our government is stopping your search for them. I waited for him to respond. Rick. I pulled my phone away and I looked at the screen. Apparently he had hung up during my diatribe for the helpless. Asshole, I said to no one in particular. Silvestri had mentioned filing the initial paperwork for the 7 missing kids, so the rest of my day was spent at the illustrious Maricopa County Recorder's Office, looking for anything filed by him in the last year. A gargantuan task if I do say so myself, as Silvestri was a practicing lawyer by trade and had piles and piles of paperwork in the place. The glamorous lifestyle of a private investigator, ladies and gentlemen. It was only an hour before the place closed that I managed to find the things that I was looking for. Official name change forms for 3 people, all 18 years old, filed in the past year. Jacob Adel, Oriana Ito, and Trevor Smith. Of course, I had no idea what to do with these names. Sure, I had them written in my notebook and I knew their circumstances, but exactly what I was going to do about it, I didn't know. If they had disappeared on their own and the OIG didn't know where they were, then I probably wasn't going to find them. And if they hadn't disappeared on their own, well, I wasn't law enforcement, so I couldn't do much about that. Maybe that bottle of Tullamore Dew in the trunk of my car could help me figure out what to do. I hadn't had a chance to crack the thing open yet, as it's generally frowned upon to be drunk as an Irishman when looking through court documents. But I was very much going to enjoy it once I arrived at the empty studio apartment. Or at least I would have if there wasn't a kid standing in front of my door. Knowing my usual clientele and how long he looked, he was probably trying to find if his one true love was cheating on him or not. Oh, life through the eyes of babes. The office hours are over, kid. Come back tomorrow when I need to buy another bottle and maybe I'll help you. The kid refused to move. Kid, come on, I've had a shitty My name is Phil Tomlinson, the kid suddenly said. I looked the kid up and down. A stringy lad that looked a couple of years younger than his build and height suggested. If he's a cigarette smoker, he's probably annoyed by how many times he's been ID'd by now. After another second where I didn't respond, he continued. Nia said you came down to Tom's office earlier asking about us. I pulled the key out of my pocket and I watched him move politely out of the way as I stuck it in the door. Not anymore, kid. Go home. No need to worry about the drunk PI looking into your shit. Mr. Rockwell said that's the exact opposite of what I want you to do. Unless you can pay enough to make it worth it to get on the FBI's bad side, then I suggest you get back to wherever you came from, Phil. I closed the door before he could respond. He immediately began knocking and saying, I'm not leaving until you talk to me at least, Mr. Rockwell. I went to my kitchen and I opened the whiskey. And if you don't leave, I'm calling the cops. I didn't, of course, and it seemed like the kid knew that because he didn't leave my door for the next 2 hours. It was about 7:30 when I decided the kid obviously had something important to say since he was still out there. You've got 5 minutes to convince me that I'm not making a mistake here, I said, blanking on the kid's name after my 5th glass of whiskey. Phil Tomlinson, yes, well, come in and get out of the night heat. You want a glass? He looked at the glass in my hand. Mr. Rockwell, I need your help. I sat on the mattress that laid in the corner of my studio and I waved my hand at the office chair in front of my desk, the only other piece of furniture in the tiny place. The kid sat and he looked at me. How much do you know? Phil asked. I sipped the whiskey in my hand. Besides the fact that there were 11 of you kids running around without hometown, social security numbers, or birth certificates. He chuckled. So you know enough. We both sat in silence for a second. So what do you need, Phil? I've got the rest of this whiskey that needs attention and it doesn't have all night. So I was interrupted for what felt like the millionth time today. I need you to find Rachel. Who? I thought you said you knew about us. I tried to sip the whiskey, but I only felt cool air as I sipped on it. Did she go through Silvestri? He was busy with the other one, so he handed her off to one of his colleagues. I could guess why he would be looking for her. The look in his eyes when he said her name were all the clues that I needed. I'm guessing your sweetie is one of the missing 7. Any idea why the FBI would be looking for her and the rest of them? A look of confusion crossed his face. You didn't know about the FBI? Silvestri didn't tell you anything? I asked. That greasy asshole doesn't tell me anything. What did you hear? Not much, just a bunch of mystery kids that have become an even bigger mystery, and the FBI has stopped any investigation into them. Anything you can tell me? He sighed. She went missing just a couple of weeks after she got here. Didn't even have enough time to get anything done. Do you think that the FBI took her? I laughed. Despite what you might think, it's not normal for the FBI to make people disappear. This isn't Stalinist Russia, kid. Did she say anything weird before she disappeared? He thought for a second before answering. Actually, the last day I saw her, she did mention something. Well, screamed it. I lifted my eyebrows in wonder. Well, she was in bed next to me and she woke me up because she kept saying something over and over again. We don't sleep well, so her talking woke me up pretty fast. For some reason, I didn't try to wake her up out of whatever nightmare she was having. She was curled up in a fetal position. Again, not unusual for her. Just like chanting to herself. I knew a couple of men that came back from Iraq with similar symptoms, and I could only guess what these kids had went through. He continued. I couldn't tell what she was saying at first. She was so quiet, so I leaned in closer. I don't have all night, just get to the point. What did she say? Phil sighed in annoyance. She kept repeating a name. Lilith. Just the name Lilith over and over again. Lilith. Lilith. Is Lilith one of the other kids with no hometown like you? I asked. No. He fidgeted in the office chair in frustration. And when I asked her about it later, she had no clue about the name either. But I waited for him to finish his thought. After I waited for a couple of more seconds, I got tired of waiting, and I asked the question that he was obviously looking for. But what? She was acting weird after she woke up. I guess I didn't think about it at the time, but she seemed to be in a rush when she woke up. I just thought that she was going to one of her court dates. A court date that she never made. I guess not. It's just so frustrating not knowing anything. I looked at the glass in my hand. It sat empty, and I contemplated kicking the kid out and finishing up that bottle that sat in my kitchen. The kid seemed sincere, and that's for sure. And he definitely hit the nail on the head when it came to all of this. It is frustrating not knowing anything. Hell, those words can probably describe why I chose the job I did back when I still had a choice of what to do with my life. Mr. Rockwell. He interrupted my fast-acting malaise. Apparently I was drunker than I thought. Sorry. Was she staying with you or was she staying with one of the other ones? She was staying in Nia's place, although she was over at mine a lot of the time, he answered. Well, I guess I know who I need to talk to tomorrow. He lifted his head and he looked at me with gratitude. But you're coming with me, I continued. I can't, I have to work. Then call out. Either way, be here at 10 tomorrow or else I'm not doing shit. I finished. He was about 5 minutes late the next day. Good for him that I had decided to sleep in and I was only awoken by the pounding on the door. Or maybe the pounding was the hangover. I'm still not entirely sure. Why am I here, Mr. Rockwell? He asked after I had opened the door and let him inside. Because you're friends with Nia and I'm going to be asking her annoying questions. Pedantic ones. Specific ones. Sure, there are vague ones, but it's the specific ones that annoy people. He stared at me in annoyance. How much did I drink last night? Also, I continued, I'm going to need you to drive. To be fair to the kid, he drove us in silence and allowed me to compose myself with a large bottle of water and a handful of ibuprofen in blessed silence. Silence which was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. The kid looked down at the screen before answering. What's up? I watched the look on his face go from neutral to annoyed, to afraid, and finally to anger in the span of a minute before he said, Did you say the FBI? I looked at him gravely and I whispered, Who's on the phone? He mouthed the word Silvestri before saying, I get it, yeah, I'll meet her there. He closed the phone and I asked, What's going on? Nia was picked up by the FBI last night while she was at work. He gasped in mock shock. No way. More annoyance from him. You knew? I decided that I should probably just be honest with him. Not that they would pick her up or anything, but I knew they would be involved. I said as much to you last night when you came over. His face went from annoyed to regretful. Sorry, memory hasn't been so great the past year. You sure it's not the lack of sleep? I said, noticing the large bags under his eyes. I told you that none of us sleep good. Anyway, Silvestri wanted us to go pick her up at the FBI field office in North Phoenix where they brought her. And he couldn't do it himself, why? Court times, apparently, he answered. It made sense for a lawyer, I guess. He pulled out his phone and asked me to pull up a GPS map for the field office. I did, and once he saw it, he said, Now since this is going to be a 20-minute drive, why don't you tell me what the hell is going on? Or at least what you know about it. I thought about keeping some of the details to myself, but this kid reminded me of the last people that I had actually helped through my work. Lost and almost alone in the world. So I told him what I knew. I told him about how the OGI was looking into Silvestri for possible fraud, and how I was hired on as a consultant to talk to him and find out what he knew. I told him how Richard had called me and told me to stop looking into it yesterday. Hell, I even told him about the fact that they only knew about 5 of the kids from last year. I thought that there were 8. he asked after I told him that. I don't think it matters at this point how many there are. Considering the circumstances of where you guys were found, there could be 100 of you. The city is big and it's easy not to get noticed. As I finished, I saw the front of the FBI Phoenix field office appear on our right. Looks like we're here. The kid pulled into the first entrance. We didn't have to stay long as he pulled up near the front entrance where a young black woman was pacing up and down the sidewalk on her phone. I couldn't hear what she was saying until the car stopped and I saw Phil's hand wave from his seat. Nia didn't get off the phone or even acknowledge our existence as she opened the back seat of Phil's Honda. I told you they didn't do anything besides ask me questions. No, they didn't use undue force. Look, Phil is here. Yeah, I love you too. Yeah, I'll be home soon. She hung up the phone and took a deep breath and said, "Who's Lilith?" What? Phil and I said simultaneously. The FBI kept asking if I knew anybody named Lilith. Who the hell is Lilith? Well, we're trying to figure that out ourselves, I said as an answer. Phil, who the hell is the older man reeking of whiskey sitting in the front seat? Sam Rockwell, private investigator, I said as I put my hand back for her to shake. She stared at it in confusion. He's the guy that Silvestri talked to yesterday. The one from the... OIG, yeah, nice to meet ya, she said. What in the hell is going on, Phil? We briefed her on what we knew, which, to be fair, wasn't much as we had no idea who Lilith was any more than her. Or apparently the FBI, as she informed us of what they had brought her in for. At first, they were asking where I was from. When I told them the same thing I've told everybody in the goddamn federal agency a million times since the day I arrived in this damn city, they didn't seem fazed. When they finally thought that I was telling the truth about that, they started grilling me about who the hell Lilith was. And I told you that Rachel was bad news. I could see the look of annoyance on Phil's face. It was an obviously sore subject matter between the two. Let's stay on subject, kids, just. I was interrupted again, this time by the sound of something large hitting the car and Phil screaming as he tried to jerk the car straight. What the hell was that? I yelled as the car came to a sudden stop with a screech onto the side of the frontage road. Phil was already looking back. She just appeared in the middle of the road. What was I supposed to do? Come on, Phil. I looked back to find Nia rubbing her arm. I stepped out of the car and I stood on the side of the road looking backward, at the mangled body that lay in a heap 50 feet behind the car. I pulled out my phone and I began to dial 911. Or at least that's what I thought I was going to do before I realized I wasn't getting a signal. I leaned back down into the car where Phil was breathing deeply and Nia was about to open the back door. Give me your cell phone. Phil kept looking forward and gripping the wheel with red knuckles. Kid, phone, now. I got it. I heard Nia's voice from just outside the car. I looked back to find her staring at her phone in obvious worry. No signal? I asked. She stared at her phone in response. I sighed and I jogged towards whoever or whatever we had just hit. Hopefully it was just some abnormally large coyote wearing a sundress. It wasn't, of course, since coyotes generally don't have opposable thumbs or wear glasses. Maybe she was okay. None of her bones were sticking out and by some miracle, none of them seemed bent enough out of place to indicate a fracture. And she was breathing. Can you hear me? I said as I leaned down and I put a finger to check her pulse, which was beating in a steady rhythm. Don't worry, an ambulance should be on its way soon. You're gonna be okay. Not unless you brought one with you, a voice said from behind me. We need to use... I turned around quickly to try and grab a usable phone from the hopefully helpful bystander, but I went silent when I saw her. The woman was stark naked. The only thing providing any sort of covering was the raven black hair that came down in waves to her navel. I fumbled out after seeing her. I'm sorry for bringing you here, son of Adam. You couldn't be helped, unfortunately. There are only so many times I can move back and forth, and this was one of those times. She smiled coyly. I heard a shuffle and I looked down to see the girl in the sundress turn over, While her clothes weren't torn from the impact with the car, the skin underneath seemed perfectly intact. She spoke as she lifted herself off the ground and said with a wide smile, "Oh, you have no need to apologize, Lilith. Him being here is a gift." The naked woman, Lilith, laughed. "It's so unfortunate that Adam had to give his sins to his descendants." I looked at the woman we had hit at 40 miles an hour, standing with unblemished skin and a wide smile, and then over at the naked woman that stood next to her. I reached under my button-up shirt where I kept my 911 in its shoulder holster before I realized that I hadn't actually put the damn thing on before I left the apartment. In light of the situation, I decided to ask a couple of questions as it's the thing I feel most comfortable doing. "Do you mean the biblical Adam?" She turned her head in curiosity. "I'm still surprised you remember your ancestors as well as you do. But no matter. My children need to get back to their paradises, and you must return to yours. From what Phil told me, it seems like more of a hell than a paradise." "Your world is their hell," she screamed suddenly. I felt the weight of her words as an actual feeling that tried to pull me to the ground. "Their parents subjected them to horrors that few can imagine. I just gave them a place that could be happy away from the rest of you. Cages, paradise, no matter what you call where I keep them safe, it's away from your kind." I tried to speak again, to ask more questions, but I was pulled to the ground by her voice as the sun overhead became darker and darker until everything went black. I was woken up sometime later by somebody shining a small light to my eye. Some pedestrian had seen me passed out on the side of the road, and they had taken the time to call an ambulance. I couldn't tell them much considering they had no idea what I was talking about, as I mentioned a naked woman standing in the street and something about Adam and Eve. Silvestri came by at some point and managed to stop me from committing myself involuntarily. It was a bit harder to explain exactly where Nia and Phil had gone to as they hadn't arrived home after Phil and I had picked up Nia. After a couple of minutes of trying to convey the fact that I had no idea what happened, Silvestri left with an obvious sadness. The FBI came by at some point. They were a lot kinder than I was expecting. Apparently they were looking into the disappearances and thought that they were connected in some way. Turns out that they only wanted to help. No one can find them. Not the FBI, not Silvestri. Hell, I don't think they even found themselves when they weren't gone. I think Phil summed up my feelings about these events best. It's just so frustrating not knowing anything.